Hello, everybody, and welcome to Trent's virtual winter open house. We're really excited to welcome you to the English literature session. My name is Sylvia, and I will be your moderator. With me today, I have Dr. Joel Bates, Associate Professor and Acting Chair of the English Literature Department, as well as Brooke Dakers, a fourth-year student in the English program. Thanks to you both for coming. It's great to have you, and thanks to all the guests. Great to welcome you to this virtual open house. So we're excited for the path that you have ahead of you and look forward to sharing all the reasons why Trent has been ranked the #1 undergrad university in Ontario for 11 years. During this session, you can pop questions in the chat, and at the end of the session, we'll have a short Q&A with both our professor and student here with us to get their insight. And so I invite you to add your questions in the chat box, which you can find at the bottom of the screen. The presentation is offered with closed captioning. To enable that, please select the 3 dots on the bottom right of your screen and select Show Subtitles. On our events page, you'll see a few live chats happening today. So if your questions aren't answered, that's a great place to go, and I'll put the links in the chat for you. We've got people there from 10 to 3 answering all kinds of admissions questions or anything that you'd like to know. So please head there if you do have any questions left after today's session. All right, so with that, let's get started with the presentation today. I'm going to hand it over to Dr. Joel Bates, and if you'd like to say a bit about yourself, and I believe we're having a sample lecture, so take it away.
Thanks, Sylvia. I want to say welcome to everyone in this room. I hope I'm probably the 18th person to welcome you here today. It's wonderful that you could make the time on a Saturday to be here, and I'm so glad that you made that choice. You're thinking about Trent, you're thinking about the English literature program, so I know that we'll get along. You've got nothing but good choices ahead of you. It's not so long ago that I was in your position, that I was applying to universities and thinking about what am I going to major in, what courses am I going to take, and I applied, believe it or not, for degrees in psychology and political science, which are wonderful programs, but they weren't for me. And then I had a really great English professor who introduced me to literatures that I hadn't encountered before. We talked about poems from Montreal and stories from medieval England and novels from the deep American South. And I found that exciting, to be in touch with ideas and emotions and people and places and ways of telling a story that I hadn't encountered before. It allowed me to see the power of stories, to think about the force of words. So if you're thinking of becoming an English major, or if you do become one, I know that you'll get asked this question: what are you going to do with that degree? It's one that haunts many an English major, right, Brooke? I think we've had this conversation before. What are you going to do with that degree? And trust me when I say that the options are open for you. Your answer to that question could be, gosh, nearly anything I want. I've had students go on to become communications professionals, to go into teaching. I have a couple students right now who are working with the city of Oshawa. They've all not just found interest in the stories that we read, but also they've discovered that it's really important to, well, do what we do in the English program at Trent, is help students learn how to read and write better. And I worry that that sounds condescending to you, right? Like that, I worry that it sounds like we're going to spend time sounding out words. And I don't mean it that way. What I mean is I want us to be able to read a text, right? So to read something like a poem or a play or short story, and not just understand what's happening, but understand the ideas that are encoded, the socio or political movements that inform that text, that think about also the material production or the material circumstances that allow that to be produced. That's a powerful way to think about the study of English literature, that it's going to help you read and write better, even as you come in contact with the large sweep of literary history, the new genres that we also talk about, and the ways in which reading is being shaped by our digital world. So for that reason, when I was invited here to give a mini lecture, I was trying to think what's the best way to demonstrate what we do in the English program. And you know what I arrived at? I'm bracing myself here. I arrived at, you know what we should talk about? We should talk about a poem. Now, I know that poetry is not everyone's favorite until we need it. There's a reason why you're likely to hear poetry at weddings and funerals and graduations. And that's because a poem is a special kind of listening or thinking, and it gives voice to big ideas. It gives voice to, well, sometimes ideas that we have trouble expressing directly. So I want to talk with you about a poem by B.P. Nichols. This is a poem that we tend to talk about in a first-year course that I teach called The Literature of Love and Hate. And I'm going to share my screen here because I want you to be able to see the poem and see part of what I'd like us to talk about. So I'm going to talk about a poem by B.P. Nichols, but in order to get there, I need to talk about Ripley's Believe It or Not. You know Ripley's, right? Ripley's has an aquarium in Toronto. Brooke, have you been to Ripley's Aquarium before? Yeah, okay. So they have an aquarium in Toronto, but they also used to have a TV show. And there was a TV show when I was in university, but there was also a TV show, an earlier version of that same show when I was growing up. And there was an episode in the 1980s where there was someone who had tattoos head to toe. There was another small excerpt from that show where someone had set the record for the world's longest fingernails, or someone else who had married a turtle. And then there was a last example, or the last example in that show was a poet from Canada on top of a rooftop with the rest of his poetry troupe called the Four Horsemen. And they stood on that rooftop in Toronto and they performed a poem. So he's well known for experimental poetry, because at the end of that episode, there's the breathy narrator who probably had too many cigars, or maybe just the right number of cigars. And he said, Ripley's Believe It or Not. Like, the poetry was that weird that it belonged alongside, the woman with the longest fingernails, or the person who attached the record number of clothesline clips to his face. Believe it or not. So B.P. Nichols, well known for, that's him with his poetry troupe. He's in the top corner there. That's B.P. Nichols. That's the Four Horsemen. He's known for writing poems like this one. This one is called Blues. Here's another one of his poems. Strange, right? Like, if your first initial reaction here is, that's weird, I say you're right. That is the best reaction, right? You're on the right track there. Here's a poem that's hammered into the pavement in a city in Toronto, a lane, alone. One of B.P. Nichols' most famous poems. And so when he wasn't writing for Fraggle Rock, because that's what he was also doing in his spare time, he was also writing this kind of poetry. He also wrote one of my favorite poems of all time, and it's from the Captain Poetry Poems. Now, when I teach this poem in first year, I teach it because it's a good way to help us learn how to read and write, what it means to do that kind of reading at a university level called close reading, where we can get so close to the text that we can get inside of it and can sort of walk around inside that text and figure out not just what's going on and how all these parts are working together, but also figure out what it's saying. So when we talk about close reading, I always encourage my students, we spend a lot of time reading out loud, because that's the best way. Brooke, you're nodding. You're like, yes, we've been through that. Brooke's taken a number of my courses. I think maybe we're up to 5 or 6 now, Brooke. We're somewhere in that zone. Yeah. And so I always have people read these poems out loud, because it's the best way to get it inside our brains. And that's the way we can start to think about it. So I want to read it out loud with you, for you. In fact, Brooke, can I ask you to help me read this poem? Because the first thing you'll notice is that it's a kind of dialogue. These are 2 characters that are writing poems back and forth to one another. And the first is by Madam X. So Brooke, you're going to play the Madam X role. That's great. Okay. And I will play the Captain Poetry role. So Brooke, you're on when you're ready. Say it loud, say it proud.
Okay. So from the Captain Poetry Poems. Dear Captain Poetry, your poetry is trite. You cannot write a sonnet, though you've tried to every night since I've known you. We're through. Madam X, sorry.
Dear Madam X, look how the sun leaps now upon our faces, stomps and boots our eyes into our skulls, drives all thought to weird and foreign places, till the world reels and the kicked mind dulls, drags our hands up across our eyes, sends all white hurling into black, makes the inner cranium our skies, and turns all looks sent forward burning back. I'm just going to press pause there and say, so far in these lines by Captain Poetry, he's talking about the experience of what it's like to look at the sun, and it's painful. It makes his head hurt. He can't look out. In fact, his thoughts turn inwards. And then he goes on. And you, my lady, who should be gentler, kind, have yet the fiery aspect of the sun, sending words to burn into my mind, destroying all my feelings one by one. You, who should have tiptoed through my halls, has slammed my doors and smashed me into walls. Love, Cap Poetry. It is one of my favorite poems of all time. And when I start talking about this with students, someone, of course, obviously says it's about love. It's a breakup poem, right? It's a breakup poem because of what Madam X writes. We're through, and you can sort of see her stamp her foot and put her hands on her hips as she says that, right? We're through, exclamation mark, exclamation mark. And then Captain Poetry responds. And when he responds, he takes up the fight, or he takes up the challenge. So one of the great questions that we have to ask ourselves when we read or talk about this poem is, who wins this battle? Because this isn't just Madam X and Captain Poetry. This isn't just boyfriend, girlfriend, or two lovers. It is an epic superhero battle. When I hear the name Captain Poetry, I think Captain America. He's a kind of poetry superhero. And Madam X, well, I also think of Professor X, right, from the X-Men that way. There are these resonances that ring throughout this poem. So we know that it's a poem about love, and a poem about conflict. And when we start to make some observations, we can see Madam X's poem is, well, she accuses Captain Poetry of being trite, but her poem is really simplistic. Her sentence length is so short. Her diction, like the kinds of words she uses, is really simple. And her tone is aggressive and angry and dismissive. But Captain Poetry, his lines are longer. His comparisons are more elaborate. His diction is higher or elevated. And he's angry too, as well, in his tone, but it's not the kind of same, straightforward hands on your hips anger, right? There's a different level, more of a complexity to his anger here too. So if we're deciding between who wins, right, between Madam X and Captain Poetry, I think we can already say, just looking at the different aspects of their poems, that it's Captain Poetry who wins. But the question we also have to ask ourselves is, does he actually write a sonnet? That's what Madam X's challenge is to him. You cannot write a sonnet, though you've tried to every night. Now, to answer that question, we got to go a long way to come back a short distance, right? And so when we go a long way to come back a short distance, we have to start with this definition of a sonnet. It's a 14-line poem. Approximately, there's 10 syllables in each line, and different kinds of sonnets have different rhyme schemes. And you have to know the different kinds of sonnets in order to think about this poem. One kind of sonnet is a Shakespearean sonnet or an English sonnet. So Shakespeare wrote a lot of poems, usually about the Dark Lady, right? So if you think about Madam X, you might think about, that Captain Poetry is recalling the relationship between Shakespeare and the Dark Lady. But in a Shakespearean or English poem, it usually has this rhyme scheme: A, B, B, A, C, D, C, D. Sorry, A, B, C, D, C, D, E, F, G, G. And that usually dictates the content. If we were writing a Shakespearean love sonnet about cheese, it might go something like this: I love cheese in the morning, A, B, A, B. I love cheese in the afternoon, C, D, C, D. I love cheese in the evening, E, F, GG, that's usually where the kicker or the punchline comes, but lo, I am lactose intolerant. Here's the other kind, the other popular kind of sonnet. The most common is a Petrarchan or an Italian sonnet. So Petrarch wrote a lot of sonnets as well. A differently structured sonnet. ABBA is the rhyme scheme. So it has the first 8 lines that sit together. ABBA, ABBA, CDE, CDE. And usually there's a kind of problem and solution, or it's a 2-part or bipartite structure. I hate that I'm lactose intolerant because I love cheese. And then in the sestet, or the last 6 lines, thank goodness for lactate, right? There's a different structure because of the rhyme scheme. Here's why all of this matters. What kind of poem does Captain Poetry write? Now, if we were in a class, I'd give you some time. You'd go back to your workstations, or you take out your poems, and you'd work through this question on your own. Given what we know about sonnets, how can we determine what kind of poem Captain Poetry writes? And here's the answer that we always come up with. Sure, the rhyme scheme tells us that it's a Shakespearean sonnet, so he is aligning himself with a great like Shakespeare, but, and here is the kicker, we can't miss this, it has the content structure of a Petrarchan sonnet. So Captain Poetry just doesn't write a single sonnet to tell Madam X that he knows how to write these poems. He writes 2 sonnets at the same time by some of the best known writers known to the Western world. He writes 2 sonnets at the same time. He just doesn't write 1 sonnet as she's challenged him to do. He writes 2 in order to demonstrate how wonderful he is. Art is his superpower. It's what allows him to eviscerate or win this argument. Now, at this point in our conversation, usually what students say, yeah, but there's that weird part. Like, why does Captain Poetry still sign his letter love? Love, Cap Poetry. Now, one answer to this question says, well, it's ironic, right? He's like, love, yeah, right. No way, I don't love you anymore. Right? So it's ironic. It's not what he wants to do. Another way to think about it is that he's actually grateful for her. He's grateful for the power of the critic who inspired him to the heights of Mount Parnassus, who inspired him to write 2 kinds of sonnets at the same time, that it was a kind of love, her criticism, and he continues that love, and he follows through in it by answering it to her, by answering her with this sonnet. This is just one of the poems that we talk about in Love and Hate. We talk in my classes about all sorts of poetry, poems, and plays. Brooke's in a class right now on contemporary Canadian literature with me, and we've talked about poems about the country north of Belleville, just down the road in Prince Edward County. The country north of Belleville. We've talked about Al Purdy's poetry. We've talked about Thompson Highway's plays. We've talked about echo poetry or nature poetry. We're about to talk about literature of the cities. And that course, or my courses, are a microcosm of everything you're going to be introduced to in your English literature degree, right? Where you have a chance to study a range of literatures. We have a very flexible program, and think about the ways in which they both allude to and depart from literary history, but you also get to venture into new genres. In new genres, I teach a class, for example, on graphic fiction, for example, right? So we talk a lot about graphic novels and the history of comic books, for example. In fact, oh yes, this is off screen. This is one of my favorite graphic novels that I've read. This is one of my favorite books that I've read in the last 5 years. It's hard to see with the background on. This is my favorite thing is Monsters, right? So it's a really wonderful graphic novel that unfolds over about 400 pages. All the pen drawings are in ink, and it tells a story of espionage and Holocaust denial. It has a historical sweep that is moving and wonderful, and it also understands the history of comic books. So we talk about these new genres as well. There are courses on performance, courses that will, all of them will help you, I should say, help you learn how to read and write better. In fact, at another open house, in another forum, and maybe Brooke, you can speak to this as well. We had another student here, Kelsey, and Kelsey's in her 4th year, and her father is an English teacher, a high school English teacher, and they were having a conversation over Thanksgiving. And one of the remarkable things that he said, because he just looked at some of her recent work, he said, wow, you've really turned out to be a really great writer, that you've become a better writer while being at Trent, right? And not just in writing your own poems, but just in expressing your thoughts. There's virtually no job that you will have where you don't have to express your thoughts in ways that are both clear and persuasive. And that's a skill that you can take wherever you want to go. Gosh, I've talked a lot, and I try not to talk too much, not just in these forums, but also in my own classes, because it's so important for students to have a chance to say what they mean and figure out what they mean to say as well. So I'm going to pause here. I'm happy to take questions. I'm also happy, Brooke, if you want to speak a little bit about your own experience. Sylvia, does this sound like a good plan here?
I love that plan.
Okay,
Yeah.
super, super. Brooke, do you want to talk a little bit about your experience in the English program, and then we'll pause for some questions?
Yeah, so I came to Trent actually as a psychology major too. And while I love the psychology program, I know that I would always go back to it sometime, maybe in the future. English was kind of, I think, kind of my calling. I really enjoyed learning about different perspectives. You know, there's courses on queer literature, modern drama. I recently just took a horror, terror, and Gothic literature course, which was phenomenal, even though I'm terrified of the dark, of even horror movies. It was a really great course. And so the course selection is great, but within those courses, including perspectives from racialized authors, you know, queer identities, Indigenous identities as well. And it's just really awesome to learn also history, historical context within novels. But also I have a very similar story actually that happened to me at Christmas. My sister, who is now a music teacher, I remember when I told her I was switching my major to English, and she was like, really? It's so interesting. And then at Christmas, I was finally able to see her. I was talking about my courses and essays I've written recently, because she is a fellow reader like myself. And she made the same comment. She's like, wow, like, you know, you seem to learn a lot from Trent, and I could tell from how you're expressing your thoughts, and that, you know, you've really enjoyed it, but also like you've grown so much from first year. And I definitely have. In my first English course, in my first year, I ended my midterm with a 50, and I was so distraught. But what remedied that was after class, every week, I would follow the professor, Megan Dimmick, back to her office, and we were working towards a final essay. So the first week, I just talked about my idea, what I was thinking. She gave me some comments. The next week, I had my thesis statement. She gave me some more comments. I went home, I reworked it, went back, and we basically did that for a month until it was the week before. And she let me hand it in early so I could have the comments towards my exam. And just from that final essay and the exam, my mark went from a 50 to an 80 in the course. And it just felt so amazing that I not only learned so much from going to see my professors outside of class, but also that there's a real benefit to it. And then I remember, so that was in the fall. In the winter, I attended an event at the Peterborough campus, the Robbie Burns. And my professor, she actually recognized me from my bag across the room. She came over, tapped me on the shoulder, and she was like, hey, Brooke, I just want to say, you know, really great job pulling up your socks for that exam and essay. Like, please, if you ever have any more questions, you know, come and see me. Join more of my classes. And we got chatting. I got to know my professor a little more, and it was just a really great experience, but also one that I've had throughout my 4 years, not just in my first year, not 50s, but you know, getting to know my professor, contributing to class, you know, making my voice heard in discussions. And yeah, I've loved my English literature experience, and I'm really happy that I stuck with it, because I jump between majors, but yeah.
Wonderful.
Can I just pick up on that idea for a minute, right? Because I think sometimes we throw around, and I see Kayla's question in the chat here. I do want to get to that, but I do sometimes think that we talk about this idea you're a name and not a number, but especially at smaller universities. But what Brooke's pointing out, that chance to have a working relationship with an instructor is what that actually means, right? What that means in practice. And I've seen that over and over and over again. What I would also want to say is that there's a pleasure in doing that as an instructor, within a course, but I also get to see Brooke from her first year to her fourth year. So the conversations that we have had since that first year are building on one another, and that matters too. Right? I think that matters whether you're going to thinking about the Peterborough campus or the Durham campus. That kind of name and not a number actually means something, right? It just doesn't mean a friendly vibe. It also means being able to have a chance to talk with your instructors. What courses would you suggest taking in English for your first year? Well, we have a few, Kayla, and we try to offer a few every year, right? And what I mean is that there's not one course, but in English, there's courses that are, I think, thematic oriented or idea oriented. So there's a course in love and hate. There's a course in truth, lies, and storytelling. There's a course on revolution. There's also courses on the creative life. There's a course on performance. And then there's a first year creative writing course. And all of those can count towards your degree. You have to take two of those courses overall, but there's a fairly wide selection. So you take what interests you and what works for your timetable. Kayla, hit me up in the chat or unmute if you want to, if you have further questions to follow up on that.
And I'm just going to add, Joel,
Yep.
One of the really nice things about the English literature program particularly was the openness of the courses you could take. It's more so like taking courses at a specific level and not so much the topic. So I didn't have to take a course in children's literature, which I dreaded, but thankfully I didn't have to. And instead I took modern drama with Joel, or I didn't have to take courses, like I didn't take revolutions. That was my truth, lies, and storytelling course the story I talked about. So you can really fine tune the courses to exactly what you want, and also like branching out into new genres too. I took a digital humanities course in my third year, and it was so much fun. We were analyzing memes, making our own memes, creating blog posts, writing not electrical, but like online dictionary entries as well. So yeah, I would just definitely branch out and take whatever courses you want and adhering to the university requirements.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's, I think you're right, Brooke. Like part of the pleasure of this program, part of the pleasure of university too, is just taking things that interest you as long as it fits. We have a question here about creative writing. What are some of the creative writing courses? So we have a really interesting approach, I think, to creative writing, in that you can take an option, which is a little smaller than a minor, but you can have an option. So there's a suite of courses that have to do with creative writing. So there's one that's called the Creative Life, or something like that. I can't remember the exact title, which talks about the creative process. So you're less making creative work there, but you're trying to understand how some people have moved through their creative process. There's also an introductory course in creative literature, but then there are mid to upper level courses on fiction, on creative nonfiction, and then advanced courses also in poetry. And those are the genres that we tend to cover: fiction, nonfiction, and poetry. And I just want to give a shout out to one of the really interesting courses that's run by Rob Winger. So Rob Winger, you might Google him. He's a fantastic poet. Joanne Finden also teaches. She's a wonderful children's author and a wonderful fiction writer as well. She also teaches in the program. But Rob Winger runs what's called a Chicken Scratch course. So Chicken Scratch is the name of our student anthology. So people submit different pieces of work. And then there's an actual course that puts together this anthology. So you learn the process of editing. In fact, I was talking to Rob yesterday, and he's a little bit tired at the moment because they just spent a lot of time as a group copy editing their work. And it's a wonderful chance for students to learn how to do that editing process. So as you become a wonderful creative writer, Venura, you start to understand what's going on at those other levels, and maybe that opens up some other opportunities for you as well to think through that. I hope that answers your question, but feel free to unmute or feel free to ask me. Sylvia, I saw you unmute, so I'm guessing you want to pop in here.
Well, we are actually at time. It's 12:30. That was a great session. And if there are any other questions, like I mentioned before on the virtual open house webpage, there's a few live chats going through the day, and there's also like a chat, an actual almost like texting with a student feature. So you can ask questions as they come up, or you can hop into a Zoom and see students and ask them your questions that way. So please do check out our schedule. I do want to thank Dr. Bates and Brooke so much for being here and sharing your knowledge and your experiences. I feel like we got a really great taste of what the English program is like at Trent from the student and prof perspective. And just so everyone here knows, if you did want to go back and kind of go over, that wonderful poem or anything that Brooke shared, the session has been recorded and it will be posted to our open house webpage. So if you wish to review it again, you can do that, and you can pop in and see any of the other sessions today. And I would like to invite you to come and visit our campuses in person. I don't know about you, Brooke or Joel, when you first came to the Trent, Peterborough, or Durham campus, but for me as an alum, it was a game changer. So we do have open houses at both campuses in March and April. So you can check those out, and you can also come for a tour. So if you're looking for a bit of a smaller gathering, you can book a tour on either campus. I think that's it. Joel, was there one last thing?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, if anyone, when you have questions about the program, reach out to me. I'm easily Googleable, Joel Bates at trentu.ca. You can email me. And if I don't have an answer to your English program questions, I'll find someone who does. If you have Trent questions that come to me, then I can always find someone to chat with you as well. Okay, so please do reach out. I look forward to seeing you all, like really in person soon, maybe, hope. Yes.
Yeah, we want to meet you.
Yeah.
Okay,
Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.